So we're on page 102. This book, which is a compilation of lessons given by the great scholar and great righteous Muslim, Shaykh Abdullah Al-Harari, rahmatullahi alayhi. We reached lesson 21, and it's titled, The Necessary Attributes of Allah. So page 102. This lesson was given by the Muhaddith, the scholar of Islamic law, Shaykh Abdullah, the son of Muhammad Al-Abdari. May Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him, in the year 1398 Hijri. And it explains the necessary attributes of Allah. Shaykh Abdullah Al-Harari gave this lesson to Shaykh Samir, the son of Sami Al-Qadi, when he first started learning the knowledge from him, and he corrected for him his copy of the text with his own hand. Yeah, so this is a lesson that Shaykh Samir, the son of Sami Al-Qadi, that he took directly from Shaykh Abdullah when Shaykh Samir, Hafidahullah, first started learning. And Shaykh Abdullah, with his own hand, he corrected for him his copy of the text with his own hand. So this is, mashallah, a special lesson. Shaykh Abdullah, may Allah have vast mercy upon him, said, all praise is due to Allah, the Lord of the worlds. To him belong the endowments and proper commendations. May Allah raise the rank of our Master Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and his Muslim relatives, and protect his nation from that which the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam fears for it. Thereafter, Allah Ta'ala revealed in Surah Al-Fatih, وَمَنْ لَمْ يُؤْمِن بِاللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ فَإِنَّا أعتدنا للكافرين سعيرا, which means, and whoever does not believe in Allah and His Messenger, then hellfire has been prepared for the blasphemers. It is an obligation to believe in Allah, along with knowing what is permissible to be attributed to Allah, and what is impossible to be attributed to Allah, and what is necessary to attribute to Him. So one believes in the existence of Allah and His attributes, and one believes in them with a firm conviction. And it is an obligation to believe in the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, along with knowing what befits him and what is permissible to be attributed to him and to his brothers among the prophets, and what is impossible to be attributed to them, and what is necessary to be attributed to them, along with the confirmation of that by uttering that with the tongue, and the minimum is to say the two testifications of faith, or what carries their meaning. And whoever does not believe in Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is deemed as a non-Muslim, and he will dwell in hellfire forever. So this short paragraph, this great scholar, Shaykh Abdullah, the son of Muhammad Al-Abdari Al-Harari, rahmatullahi alayhi, he gives a very concise explanation, a very brief explanation about what makes someone a Muslim. So the Muslim is the one who believes in Allah and His Messenger. So he has to believe in the existence of Allah and His attributes, and he has to believe in them with a firm conviction, meaning without any doubt, without any hesitation. And he has to believe in the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the correct way, yani while knowing what befits him. What does that mean? While knowing what befits him, yani by attributing to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam what is befitting to attribute to him. And that together with the firm conviction, yani without any doubt, in the person's heart, and he says the shahada, yani he says the testification of faith, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, or la ilaha illallah Muhammadun Rasulullah, yani without or any statement that carries that meaning in any language. So he has to utter that and say that with his tongue. And so that's what makes the person a Muslim. And if he does not believe in Allah and His Messenger, then he is judged as a non-Muslim. The author said, before beginning this study, let it be known that the judgments of the mind are three. The first is the intellectual necessity, and this is what is intellectually impossible not to exist. That is, the mind does not accept the non-existence of its being. Therefore, the existence of Allah is an intellectual necessity. Allah is the one whose existence is judged as necessary by the mind, because the mind does not accept his non-existence. That is, the mind does not accept the non-existence of the being of Allah, yani of the reality of Allah. So basically, the rational mind, the one who uses his mind correctly, his mind would reject that the Creator is non-existent. His mind would reject it. So why do we say if he uses his mind correctly? Because some people don't use their mind correctly and they don't make a proper deduction, and so they would come to an improper conclusion. But the one who uses his mind correctly, he would see that he himself, for example, starting with himself, I was non-existent, and then I began to exist. So my existence was not given by me. And my parents, for example, they're like me in that sense, in the sense that their existence wasn't given by them. And their parents also, their existence wasn't given by them. And so on and so forth until reaching the starting point, the beginning point, which is, for example, the first man, the first human, the first male and female. So who gave them their existence? Because since they're like us, since they're human like us, we know that they didn't give themselves their existence. We know their existence was given to them. So who gave them their existence? And if the one who gave them their existence is not like them, the one who gave them their existence, it's necessary that they be existing. Because why? Because if they were not existing, and if it was the case that they were not existent, then they wouldn't be able to create someone. And they wouldn't be able to give existence to anyone. So the mind says, since this universe is here, and the universe is like us, and so that means the universe did not make itself exist, that means that someone gave the universe its existence. And that someone is necessarily existent. What does that mean, necessarily existent? It means that someone that someone, non-existence does not apply to them. So it's someone who non-existence does not apply to them. It's someone that non-existence they're not subject to non-existence. Now that's what it means. The mind does not accept the non-existence of Allah. Meaning, the one who uses his mind correctly, and his mind would judge that Allah, and the Creator, has to exist. And why is that? Because we exist. And we didn't make ourselves exist. We didn't give ourselves a beginning. And the universe is like that too. The universe didn't give itself a beginning. So we know that there's someone who has to exist that made these other things exist. That made these other things exist. That gave these other things their existence. And that someone is the Creator. His name is Allah. And there's many revealed names to the Creator, but the best of them is Allah. And so when we say judgments of the mind, when the Shaykh said judgments of the mind, he's referring to the categories that the mind categorizes or the mind labels these things with these categories. So the first one is intellectually impossible not to exist, or you could say intellectual necessity. Intellectual necessity. What does that mean? It means that the mind judges that its existence is necessary, that it has to exist. So this is what it means, intellectual necessity. So for us, this is how we judge. We say Allah, the mind judges that Allah, His existence is necessary, meaning that our minds do not accept His non-existence. Our minds reject that Allah would not exist, and that the Creator would not exist. Our minds reject it. So this is what it means about the intellectual necessity. So now we're going to mention the second one. The second judgment of the mind is the intellectual impossibility. And it is that which the mind does not accept its existence. That is, it does not accept existence to begin with in and of itself. Therefore, a partner with Allah is impossible to exist. It does not accept existence. That is, the mind does not accept its existence. The third is the mental impossibility, and the third is the mental possibility, and it is that which the mind accepts its existence at one time and its non-existence at another. Therefore, the universe and what is in it, among the things that we see and the things that we do not see, is a mental possibility, because the mind accepts its existence after non-existence and its non-existence after existence. This is the case of the universe. So the human, for example, was brought into existence by God after having been non-existent, and then he will die. And this is why he is among the mental possibilities. So for the mental possibility, the intellectual possibility, it's that thing that accepts both. At one time it can be existent, another time it can be non-existent. So for that thing, the mental possibility, it can be existent at a certain point in time, and it can be non-existent at a certain point in time. So those are mental possibilities. Allah Ta'ala revealed in Surah Al-Nahl, وَلِلَّهِ الْمَثَلُ الْأَعْلَى. The verse means Allah is attributed with the attributes that do not resemble the attributes of others. It is obligatory to believe that the attributes of Allah are affirmed to the being of Allah, and whoever negates them is called a mu'attil, a non-believer who negates the attributes. Yani someone similar to an atheist, yani someone that is negating the attributes of Allah. This is mu'attil. Hence, the atheist who, for example, does not believe in the existence of God has negated God's attribute of existence, and that is why he is called a mu'attil. And in Arabic, that's why it's called a mu'attil, and someone basically like a canceller, like a validator, and he's someone who is saying God does not exist. And they are negating, or they are saying that God doesn't exist, that his attribute of existence is rejected. So that's why they're called mu'attil. So we have to believe that God is attributed with attributes of perfection. So we have to confirm the attributes of Allah. These attributes that are obligatory to believe in are affirmed to the being of Allah, and they are not the being of Allah. So the attributes that we have to believe in, we confirm that they are attributed to Allah, and at the same time we say they are not the attribute of Allah. At the same time we say they are not the reality of Allah. They are not the being of Allah. Yani they are not Allah. So these attributes, they are confirmed to be attributes of Allah, and we don't say that they are Allah. So these attributes, we don't say that they are Allah, and we don't say that they are other than Allah. These attributes that are obligatory to believe in are affirmed to the being of Allah, and they are not the being of God, and they are not other than the being of God. So we say there are attributes that he is attributed with that are necessary to be attributed to him mentally and religiously. The saying of Imam al-Nasafi is, and they, the attributes of Allah, are not him nor other than him. The attributes that are obligatory upon every Muslim who is pubescent and sane to know, and they are the attributes of the being of Allah, and the attributes which God is not attributed with their opposites, are 13 attributes that the Muslim Imams have a consensus that the one who is ignorant of them is an enormous sinner. Footnote number 1, whoever negates any of them is a non-Muslim. So that saying about Imam al-Nasafi, that the attributes of Allah, they are not Allah and they are not other than Allah, this is what we have to believe in, and we have to know that, and that is the saying of Ahlul Sunnah, and it's not something that we can imagine. So we cannot imagine this, just like we cannot imagine the reality of Allah. But we have to know that Allah Ta'ala, He is not His attributes, and His attributes, that the attributes of Allah are not Allah or other than Allah. So then the author began to talk about the attributes that are obligatory upon every Muslim, which be best in saying to know, every accountable Muslim. And these are the attributes of the being of Allah, the attributes of the reality of Allah, and the attributes which Allah is not attributed with their opposites. These are 13 attributes that the Muslim Imams have a consensus that the one who is ignorant of them is an enormous sinner. These attributes are existence, eternity, everlastingness, knowledge, will, power, oneness, non-resemblance to the creation, non-neediness of the creation, hearing, sight, speech, and life. So these are the 13 attributes that every accountable Muslim is obligated to know by consensus. First, existence. Allah revealed in the chapter of Ibrahim, أَفِي اللَّهِ شَكٍّ. So it is obligatory to believe in the existence of Allah, and it is an attribute of Allah which is eternal and everlasting. Allah exists without a beginning, He exists without an end, and He exists without a place. Second, eternity. It is an obligation to believe that God is eternal, meaning He has no beginning to His existence, and that His attributes are eternal, they have no beginning. Third, everlastingness. It is an obligation to believe that Allah is the one who has no end to His existence. He is everlasting and His attributes are everlasting. It is intellectually impossible for non-existence to befall Allah. As for paradise and hellfire, although they are everlasting, it is because God willed for them to be everlasting. They are among the mental possibilities. They are a part of this universe. Allah revealed in Surah Al-Hadid, وَالْأَوَّلُ وَالْآخِرُ. The verse means Allah is eternal and everlasting. Fourth, oneness. It is an obligation to believe that Allah is one without a partner. Allah revealed in the chapter of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, فَعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ, which means, know, O Muhammad, Allah Ta'ala is, there is no God but Him. Know, O Muhammad, that there is no God except Allah. On a side note, from these verses and from other types of verses that are similar to this, we know that it is permissible to say about Allah, God. So there's some ignorant people out there who they say that it's forbidden to refer to Allah as God. And they have no proof for their saying. Sometimes you might hear them say, the word or the name Al-Ilah, it's not one of the 99 names, and we will say, okay, Al-Ilah was not narrated, let's say, in the 99 names, but that doesn't mean that those are the only names. So the 99 names, they have a special merit, because they were narrated all at once, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he mentioned that whoever memorizes them and knows their meanings, that he will enter paradise without previous torture. So these names, these are special names, but they're not the only names. But in this type of verse, فَعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. So we know that basically when we say La ilaha illallah, we're saying the only God is Allah. And the only ilah is Allah. There is no ilah except Allah. There is no ilah other than Allah. So, of course we can call Allah God. We can say about Allah God. In English and in any other language, in French, in Spanish, in German. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not simple. These people that say that, they are they're really out of here. They're really far gone. They're very wacky. The author said, God is one in His being, so He has no similar, and He is one in His attributes. His attributes do not change. Allah is the creator, and there is no creator except Allah. Allah is one, not in the context of numbers, because the numbers are created, rather in the context that He has no partner. Fifth, non-resemblance to the creations. Therefore, Allah does not resemble any of the creations, not in His being and not in His attributes. Allah revealed in Surah Ash-Shura, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٌ. The verse means absolutely nothing resembles Him in any way. Imam Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu said the Creator does not resemble His creation. 6. Non-neediness of the creations. Allah revealed in Surah Al-Ikhlas, Allahu Samad. The verse means Allah is the one whom everything needs Him, and He does not need anyone. God does not need anything. Therefore, He does not need someone to bring Him into existence, because He exists without a beginning, and He does not need someone to specify Him with knowledge instead of ignorance or other than it among His attributes, because He is attributed with them eternally. 7th, knowledge. It is an obligation to believe that Allah is attributed with knowledge, and it is an eternal and everlasting attribute, which is a necessary attribute of Allah. Allah knows with His eternal and everlasting knowledge His being and His attributes, and what He creates among His creations. Nothing is hidden from His knowledge, because He knows everything eternally. Yani Allah knows Himself and His attributes, and Allah Ta'ala knows all the creation. Yani so nothing is hidden from His knowledge. Allah Ta'ala knows His reality and His attributes and all the creation without exception, and there is nothing hidden from the knowledge of Allah. 8th, will. It is an obligation to believe that Allah is attributed with will, and it is an eternal and everlasting attribute by which Allah specifies the mental possibility with some of what is permissible for it, like specifying the green thing with being green instead of another color among the colors it could possibly have. There is no difference in that between the good and the evil, kufr and belief, victory and loss, and other than that, among the opposites, among the mental possibilities. Yani Allah Ta'ala willed for everything that exists in this universe to exist. And everything that exists in this universe, it exists by the will of Allah. All the dualities that exist in this universe, they exist by God's will. 9th, power. It is obligatory to believe that Allah is attributed with power, and it is an eternal and everlasting attribute of God that is related to bringing the mentally possible into existence and annihilating it. Allah revealed in Surah Al-Baqarah, إِنَّ اللَّهَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ. The verse means Allah has power over everything. It means over everything among the mental possibilities. Hence, the power of Allah is not related to what is mentally impossible not to exist, neither by creating nor by annihilating, because the being of Allah is attributed with eternity and everlastingness, and the mind does not accept His non-existence. Likewise, the power of God is not related to the mentally impossible, neither bringing into existence nor annihilating, because it itself does not accept existence to begin with. The fact that the power of Allah is not related to the mentally impossible and to the mental necessity is not a weakness. Rather, it is perfection, and it is among the deductions of the mind. Also, because the mental impossibility does not turn into a mental possibility. The power of Allah is related to what is judged as normally impossible. And so here we'll talk in some detail. So we said about the intellectual impossibility and the intellectual necessity. Remember we said the intellectual necessity is that which the mind rejects its non-existence. So what does that mean? It means that the intellectual necessity, yani Allah and His attributes, non-existence does not apply to it. And a non-existence is not applicable to Allah and His attributes. Yani, it's not possible that Allah would not exist. And it's not possible that the attributes of Allah would not exist. Yani, non-existence does not apply to Allah or His attributes. Yani Allah and His attributes, they are not subject to non-existence. And so that's for the intellectual necessity. For the intellectual impossibility, existence doesn't apply to it. So whatever is intellectually impossible, existing for that thing, it doesn't apply. So the intellectual impossibility is not subject to existence. It doesn't accept existence. So what does that mean? That means that, or let's take something that will make it easier for the person to understand. So let's say that there is an inanimate object, right? Like a stone, a rock, right? If someone asks you, does that rock have a high IQ or a low IQ? You can't answer with high or low. Why? Because IQ doesn't apply to the rock because it doesn't have a mind. So you cannot say about it that it has a high IQ or a low IQ because having an IQ is not applicable to it in the first place. If someone says about, for example, a table, is this table knowledgeable or ignorant? We say that knowledge and ignorance, they don't apply to the table. So the table is not subject to knowledge or ignorance because it doesn't have a mind. So, for example, we say about Allah that He exists without a beginning. And He's the only one that exists without a beginning. So we say, having a beginning does not apply to Allah. And it's not possible that Allah would have a beginning. Another thing, change. So we say Allah Ta'ala, He's the only one that exists without a beginning, therefore He's not subject to change. So change does not apply to Allah. So that means that it would be invalid and incorrect, and it wouldn't fit, and it would be invalid for someone to say, Allah makes Himself change. It would be invalid to say, and it would obviously blasphemy to say, that Allah makes Himself change. Why? Because change does not apply to Allah. So if someone is like a Christian or an atheist, because they try to do this a lot, they try to tell the Muslim, oh, so you're saying that God is weak and He is incapable of changing Himself. And we say, change does not apply to Allah in the first place. And the power of Allah is not related to intellectual impossibility. That means the things that don't accept existence to begin with, and in the power of Allah, they are not subjects to the power of Allah. Things that intellectually they do not accept existence to begin with, they're not related to the power of Allah. The power of Allah is not related to them. Because the power of Allah is the attribute by which He makes things enter into existence and makes things exit from existence. So if there is something that for it to exist, it doesn't accept existence, then that means the power of Allah is not related to it. So when we say it's invalid to say about Allah that He makes Himself change, for example, that's what the Christians say. When you tell a Christian what you believe is incorrect because you worship a creation, because they worship Jesus, and they say, Na'udhu billah, they say, Jesus is God in the flesh. Na'udhu billah. They believe that, God transformed Himself into Jesus. Na'udhu billah. And we say, whatever transforms is a creation. And therefore it's not God. And we say, it is intellectually impossible that God be attributed with change, because whatever changes, then it's judged as a creation. And God is not a creation. God is the creator. So they say, oh, you're limiting God's power. And we say, God's power is not related to the intellectual impossibility. The intellectually impossible, that thing which existence doesn't apply to it, God's power is not related to God's power. God's power is not related to it. So the fact that That intellectual impossibility does not accept existence. It is not because, or it is not called weakness. Now, for something that is called in Arabic al-mustahil al-adi, right? Because there's things that are normally impossible, not intellectually impossible. So this is different. What's an example of something that is normally impossible? Like, let's say, a mountain of gold. A mountain of pure gold. This is normally impossible. And normally it doesn't occur. So these things that are normally impossible, we say that the power of Allah is related to those things, meaning that Allah Ta'ala, meaning that a mountain of gold is something that could possibly exist, but normally does not exist. And Allah Ta'ala can make it exist. Then the Shaykh said, 10th is hearing. It is an obligation to believe that Allah is attributed with hearing, and it is an eternal and everlasting attribute of Allah, by which He hears all the hearable things with no difference between what is close to us or far from us. He hears without an ear or means or organ, and there is no weakness that occurs to His hearing, nor any change, because that does not befit to be attributed to Allah. Allah revealed in Surah Ash-Shura, وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ. The verse means that He is attributed with hearing and sight. 11th, sight. It is an obligation to believe that God is attributed with sight, and it is an eternal and everlasting attribute of Allah, by which He sees all the seeable things without an organ or intermediary. He sees all things, whether they are far from us or close to us. Change does not occur to God's attribute of sight, because the eternal being does not change, and His eternal attributes do not change. 12th, kalam. It says here speech, yani it is referring to kalam. It is an obligation to believe that Allah is attributed with speech, and it is an eternal and everlasting attribute of Allah. God orders, forbids, and informs with it. It is not a letter or a sound or a language. As for the Quran, when referring to the revealed terms upon the Prophet ﷺ, and other than it among the revealed books, it is an expression referring to the eternal and everlasting speech of God. Just as if we wrote Allah, the word Allah, that is the term Allah, this word is an expression referring to the being of Allah, and it is not itself the being of Allah. And if we write the word Allah, and we say, if someone asks us what is written there, we say Allah. But those words, or that term, that word made up of those letters, is not what we worship. We don't worship those letters. We worship what those letters are referring to. We worship the reality that those letters are referring to. So likewise, the Quran, it is an expression referring to the speech of Allah, and it was called Kalamullah, because it is not authored by Muhammad or Jibreel, alayhim as-salam. The term Quran may also be used to refer to the eternal and everlasting speech of Allah. God revealed in Surah An-Nisa, وَكَلَّمَ اللَّهُ مُوسَى تَكْلِيمًا. So here, more detail. So we know that the Wahhabis, they attribute similarity to Allah. And they liken Allah to the creations. And they say Allah, they attribute to Allah attributes that are similar to the creations. And at the same time they deny, and they say, but we don't know how. And so that doesn't save them, they are still judged as kuffar for that, by consensus. So they say, oh, you Sunni Muslim, you Ash'ari and you Maturidi, you say about Allah, or you say about the Quran, that it's created and that it has a beginning, etc. We say that about the Quran, and in the context when we're teaching people, we say the letters and the sounds that are that we recite. Alhamdulillah, this is Quran. We call that Quran. But those letters and sounds, those Arabic letters and sounds and words, those are not the attribute of Allah. They are not the eternal and everlasting attribute of Allah. So essentially we're saying Allah does not speak Arabic or any other language, because whatever speaks with the language is a creation. It's similar to us. So the Wahhabis, they have this part confused. They do not understand this well. So we say the Quran is not authored by Angel Jibreel or by Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And those words that we recite, those sounds and letters that we recite, are not the attribute of Allah. They are expressions referring to the eternal and everlasting attribute of Allah that is not a sound, letter, or language. But so those letters, the revealed terms, those sounds and letters that we recite, in the Arabic language, it's valid to call it Quran. And the attribute of Allah that has no beginning and has no end, and it's not a sound, letter, or language, it is also valid in the Arabic language to call that Quran. So we can use the word Quran referring to the letters and sounds that we recite, which are not the attribute of Allah, and we can use the word Quran to refer to the attribute of Allah, which is not a sound, letter, or language. And the same thing for Kalamullah. In the Arabic, it's Kalamullah, yani the speech of Allah. We can say Kalamullah about the Quran that we recite with our tongues and in the letters and sounds, with the meaning that these are the revealed terms that are expressions referring to the eternal and everlasting attribute, which is not a sound, letter, or language. And we can use the term Kalamullah to refer to the attribute of Allah, which is not a sound, letter, or language. So we say Allah is attributed with an attribute of Kalam. That's eternal and everlasting, without a beginning, without an end. That's not a sound, letter, or language. 13th, life. God revealed in Surah Al-Baqarah, Allahu la ilaha illa huwa al-hayyul qayyum. Life is an eternal and everlasting attribute of Allah, and the life of Allah is not like our life, because our life is in need of the combination of the soul and the body. As for the life of Allah, it is His attribute. So here we see clearly the difference. The Wahhabi here, he also is confused about this issue as well. So we say, Allah Ta'ala is attributed with life. His life is not like our life. His life has no beginning, has no end. It's not composed of flesh, blood, bones, a soul. It's not like our life. It's not physical. So we say about ourselves that we're attributed with life, but our life, when we say life about ourselves, it means a beginning, it means having an end, it means being composed of blood and a soul and flesh and organs, etc. It means that we go through changes, etc. So the term is the same, right? We say about Allah that He's attributed with life, and we say about ourselves that we are attributed with life. But we still say there's no similarity between us and Allah. So the Wahhabi tries to say, oh, well, then in that case, we can say about ourselves, we can say about Allah that He has a hand and that we have a hand, and that it's not like our hand. And we say, actually, with the term hand, you can't do that. Why? Because the term hand is not an abstract noun. It's a concrete noun. Meaning, in the English language, when you say hand, it's referring to organ. It's referring to something that has a shape and a size.
Yeah, that's right.
It's referring to something that is physical. When we say life about Allah, there's a meaning to it that is not physical. And so we attribute that to Allah, and we say that His life is not like our life, and because it's not physical. But when it comes to hand, we do not say that about Allah, because the word hand was not revealed to be attributed to Allah. Rather, the word yad was revealed to be attributed to Allah. And you cannot translate yad to mean hand when referring to Allah, because hand is only an organ. Hand is an organ. That's the meaning of the word hand. So we cannot say that Allah is attributed with a hand that's unlike our hand, because the word that is narrated in the Quran or the Hadith referring to Allah is yad. And the word yad has 15 different meanings in the Arabic language. So it's not permissible or valid to assign only the meaning of hand to the word yad when referring to Allah, when the word yad in the Arabic language has 15 different meanings. Among them is hand, but also among them is support. And in Arabic, you can use the word yad to mean support, not as a figure of speech, rather an inherent definition of the word. And I've done this exercise with the word ayn. In Arabic, the word ayn, ya, noon, the word ayn, in Arabic has many meanings. Among the meanings of the word ayn, yani inherently in the language, in the Arabic language, is eye, the eye of the organ. And among the meanings of the word ayn in Arabic is spy, like James Bond. And another meaning of the word ayn in the Arabic language is spring, yani like the water that shoots out from the ground. So in Arabic, you can say, and it will make sense, and it's a proper sentence, you can say, I saw an ayn with my ayn, and I drank from an ayn. The same word. But in those three different places, it means eye, like the organ, spy, like James Bond, and spring. So in English, you can't say, I saw an eye with my eye and I drank an eye. You can't use eye for spy, you can't use eye for spring, you can't use eye for the organ in English. You'd have to use each corresponding meaning for what you're trying to say in English. But in Arabic, you can use the same exact word, same exact pronunciation, same exact spelling for those three meanings in one sentence, and it'll be understood. It'll make sense. So in English, you can't say, I saw an eye with my eye and I drank from an eye, and then the person's going to understand from that you saw a spy with your eye and you drank from a spring. No one's going to understand that. If you tell someone in English, I saw an eye with my eye and I drank from an eye, they're never going to understand from that, I saw a spy with my eye and I drank from a spring. Nobody's ever going to understand that. But in Arabic, you can say, I saw an ayn with my ayn and I drank from an ayn. And they're going to understand. Any person is going to understand that in the Arabic language. Why? Because the word ayn itself, it means all those things. So the same thing with the word yet. The same concept applies to the word yet. Has 15 different meanings. So you can use yet, the word, to mean one of those 15 different meanings. So when referring to Allah, we don't use the word, we don't translate hand. Because it doesn't mean hand when referring to Allah. Yadullahi fawqa aydihim. It doesn't mean that the hand of Allah is over their heads. It means the promise of Allah, the oath of Allah is above their oaths. And because that's referring to when the companions, they made a pact, they made an oath to the Prophet ﷺ, and they literally put their hands with the hand of the Prophet ﷺ to make that pledge and make that oath and make that promise. So the verse doesn't mean that Allah has a hand and that He put His hand over their hands, because that's ridiculous. That is, and He has blasphemy. That's attributing physicality to Allah. But the Wahhabi will tell you, no, you can't imagine it. You can't think about it. So then what are you saying? If you're saying that Allah put His hand over their hands, what are you saying? They're saying, no, it doesn't mean that He put His hand on top of their hands. We don't know how, we can't think about it, you can't imagine it. So then what you're saying doesn't make sense. And it's what you're saying, and it's not something that is understandable. But when you say, the promise of Allah is above their oath or above their pledge, and the guarantee of Allah always goes through, and what He promises and guarantees will always occur. And those people who made that pledge, those companions who made that pledge, because they made an oath that they'll never commit blasphemy, that they'll never fornicate, that they'll never steal, that they'll never commit certain sins, it's possible that they'll break their oath. And it's possible that one of them might fornicate, one of them might commit a sin, etc., even though they promised that they wouldn't. But the promise of Allah always goes through. That makes sense. That makes sense. So in Islam, and in the creed of Islam makes sense. It corresponds with the mind. You don't have to turn off your intellect in order to believe something in Islam. We're not like the Christians or the Jews, that they have to turn off their mind in order to believe what they believe. And the Wahhabis are like that. When you confront them with these rhetorical questions, they'll say, no, you can't think about it. No, you can't ask that question. No, that's how the philosophers talk. No. They'll put their hands and they'll put their fingers in their ears. Like, because you're speaking intellectually and you're using proofs and evidence that this is what is the basis of the Quran and the Hadith or the da'wah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Using evidence, using proof. But those people, those Wahhabis, they turn off their minds and they say, no, you can't ask that. Or no, the companions, they didn't say that or they didn't ask that. But they're lying. They're lying. There's many things that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he taught the companions and intellectual proofs. And whoever follows or believes the belief of the Wahhabis, he contradicts his mind, and he has to contradict his mind. So he has to have what they call cognitive dissonance. He has to turn off his mind more to believe it. And Allah Ta'ala knows best. And by that, the Shaykh finished that lesson, lesson 21. Next week, inshallah, we'll continue with lesson 22. And it's titled, The True Sufis Are on the Creed of Clearing Allah from Resembling the Creations, which is a very important subject to know about, because Sufism originally, the concept itself, it is something that is based on implementing the Islamic law perfectly. And Sufism is not what some misguided people have misappropriated the name, and they have claimed that they are Sufis, but in reality they're not. So that lesson is going to clarify that difference. So these people that, like Nadim and Qubusli, or people that, as students nowadays that follow him, those are not the Sufis. They're not Sufis. The Sufi is the Muslim who implements the Islamic law perfectly, while depriving himself of permissible comforts and permissible enjoyment. And we're going to talk in detail, inshallah, about it. If there are no questions about anything that we mentioned, we'll conclude. طيب مهلل لا إله إلا الله اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله والمؤمنين والمؤمنات وبارك الله فيكم. السلام عليكم.